A plane crash in the Russian Federation, friends. A passenger plane crashed with almost 50 people on board. It is reported that this aircraft was 50 years old. But instead of updating its fleet, which has become nothing more than a graveyard for Russians, the Kremlin continues to escalate its conflict with Azerbaijan. And now there's information emerging that the keys to the war in Ukraine, by the way, are actually in China's hands, not the US. In addition, it's interesting to note the news that Xi Jinping recently spoke with the leadership of the European Union in Beijing. We'll also discuss what agreements were reached. And at the same time, the prospect of a personal meeting between Putin and Zelensky has once again appeared on the horizon. Zelensky is openly ready to meet with Putin at any time. But in the Kremlin, as usual, they're dragging things out, citing various reasons and making excuses. We are gathering the most important events of the day into a short segment. Please stay tuned for the discussion with Roman Symbaliuk in a few minutes. In the meantime, let's watch the segment.
On the 23rd of July, the third round of negotiations between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations took place. There was no real breakthrough, and the meeting lasted less than an hour.
Thank you very, very much indeed for your kind attention and consideration.
Zelensky is ready to meet with Putin as soon as tomorrow. During the negotiations, Rustem Umerov proposed to the Russians to organize a meeting of the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, Turkey and the United States by the end of August.
This is a standing offer that can be implemented at any time. If Putin says tomorrow, "I am ready to meet with President Zelensky," President Zelensky will be ready to meet tomorrow. I think that is the answer to your question about the final date.
Nevertheless, the Russian side, as always, is stalling. According to Medinsky, in order for the meeting to take place, the terms of the agreement need to be worked out, and topics for discussion by the leaders need to be prepared. What does that mean?
No, of course not. Such a meeting is not being planned because it needs to be thoroughly prepared since, let's say, the positions of the memorandums presented publicly by Ukraine and Russia are still too far from being synchronized. The countless reasons that the Russian side and Putin himself finds in order, of course, not to attend such a leaders' meeting and not to meet directly with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, which is absolutely obvious.
Meanwhile, Russia continues to lose its influence. Azerbaijan has distanced itself, and now even Armenia has turned its back on Russia by organizing a bilateral meeting without the Kremlin's participation.
Do they want to take a tougher stance toward the Russian Federation? Of course, yes. Do they want to have the ability to better protect the interests of the citizens or ethnic Azerbaijanis living in the Russian Federation? Absolutely, yes. Azerbaijan and President Aliyev personally will pursue this through their strategic partnership with Turkey and, of course, through the active development of the Silk Road, that is the overland connection between China and Europe that is currently being built.
Apparently, against the backdrop of the conflict with the Azerbaijanis, the Russian authorities have effectively started a hunt even against Russians themselves. In the Chelyabinsk region, officials declared the Russian community extremist without trial or any grounds. Now people are being threatened with prosecution.
I urge everyone to join the Russian community, where an atmosphere of brotherhood and mutual support prevails.
Is China really in charge of everything now? On the 23rd of July, Xi Jinping met with the presidents of the European Council and the European Commission in Beijing, supposedly to establish stability under the current circumstances.
Is China interested in having Russia serve as a major bogeyman for Europe? Yes, they are interested as well. In fact, I'll go even further. Even the United States, in the person of Trump, as we can already see from this configuration, is partially satisfied with this as well, because only this fear in Europe of a direct attack, of escalation from the Russian Federation, has raised NATO membership contributions to 5%. And Europe is ready to pay for armaments not only for itself, but also for Ukraine, thereby boosting the American economy.
Well, here comes story time. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, known for her support of Trump and anti-Ukrainian statements, has spread a fake story about protests in Kyiv. According to her, people supposedly took to the streets against President Zelensky.
Mass protests are taking place in Kyiv against Ukrainian President Zelensky, who is a dictator and refuses to sign a peace agreement and end the war. Thank you to the Ukrainian people. Remove him from office. And America should stop funding and sending weapons.
Of course, the protests in many Ukrainian cities have nothing to do with calls for capitulation. But for people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's a convenient excuse to present wishful thinking as reality. But could this fake be dangerous for Ukraine?
I think it's obvious to many people, and in fact, the main intelligence directorate has officially written about this, that the Russian Federation is already preparing to use this methodology of peaceful protest for its own purposes. So will different sides use this, whether it's already created images or ones they will create tomorrow to achieve their political and other goals? Well, of course, yes. The Pandora's box has been opened.
And now briefly about the magic of Russian politics. The other day, a State Duma deputy from United Russia managed to vote on 11 bills. And that would be nothing except for the fact that at the same session it was officially announced that he had died.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Roman Simbalyuk, journalist and blogger, is joining us on air. Roma, welcome. Glad to see you.
Hey, hi Alexander. As always, the feeling is mutual.
Roma, let's start with this. We'll get to Istanbul later, to what the Ukrainian and Russian delegations managed to agree on. At the very least, there is good news about the return of prisoners of war. But I want to start with this. A Russian rust bucket, which was over 50 years old, crashed. By the way, in recent years, this is already the fourth aviation incident, you could say. So 50 people died while Russia is pouring money into the war, quarreling with Azerbaijan, and its aircraft fleet is turning into, well, as we can see what it is now. Tell me, do Russians not care about this from what you see? Or does it somehow affect Russian society or the population? What's your opinion?
Well, everyone probably thought those who died were just unlucky. And those PO people who were on board, that AN plane, a wonderful plane, just very old, and it ended up in the wrong hands, in bad hands, and ultimately crashed. So in Russia, they like to sit around and ponder in the swamps about who had what starting opportunities after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And they like to talk about how Ukraine had all these opportunities but didn't take advantage of them. And maybe we didn't take advantage of some things, but at the very least, we didn't become Nazis. So if we're talking about the Russian Federation under Putin, and as far as I can tell, they've only ever really had Putin. So what is the thing that stands out about the rise to power of the Russian power maniac? The rise in energy prices. And over the past 20 years, Russia has been showered with, well, not just a golden rain. And here I mean gold as an actual gold, not anything else. They could have rebuilt the separate Donetsk in the Rostov region and Luhansk and so on and so forth. And they could have replaced all the airplanes and bought a ton of machines to produce new ones. But in the end, they decided it was much more interesting, for example, to drop 2 aerial bombs on Kharkiv, like they did this morning. So just think about it again. They're flying 50-year-old planes, but at the same time, they get a thrill out of killing Ukrainians with these air-dropped munitions. I mean, on the one hand, we've all gotten used to this, but once again, a big city, a city of 1 million people, the Russian army drops 2 KAB bombs in the city center. Many are wounded. I haven't heard about any fatalities yet, and I hope there won't be any. But what am I getting at here? Now, math is everywhere, in war and in life. So if you count how many KB bombs they've dropped on Ukrainian territory, you could have, I don't know, started an entire airline with the money they wasted. But it seems these scumbags aren't really interested in that question. So the Russians died, let them all burn in hell. Sorry for being blunt, but we won't have any sympathy. Maybe Yulia Latinina will scold us again for not sympathizing with Russians, for having lost our humanity. And she quotes Ukrainian officials who said something in the heat of the moment after Russian war crimes. And by the way, pay attention, Latinina and Lavrov. Lavrov, for example, recently handed the US Secretary of State a list of so-called Russophobic quotes from Ukrainian politicians. I'm just saying, look at how all of this is synchronized. So the story with the airplanes is clear, and considering they've been under strict aviation sanctions for 3 years, it's surprising that not a single Boeing or Airbus has crashed yet. They're just lucky fools. But it won't always be that way.
Let's talk about the results of the meeting in Istanbul. The meeting itself was very brief. As I already mentioned, the result is excellent. Our prisoners of war are coming home. That is always worth every effort. But nevertheless, our foreign minister announced that Zelensky is ready to meet with Putin. At the same time, Medinsky stated that indeed this meeting could take place, but it needs to be thoroughly prepared and so on and so forth. Tell me, please, is there any potential at all, and I don't know, any point, any subject for a meeting between Putin and Zelensky?
Well, the question is, what would be the purpose of meeting? That is, if we are talking about a meeting, then at the very least, we should establish a ceasefire. And as strange as it may seem, of course, there won't be a meeting, at least not in the foreseeable future. Honestly, I don't think there will be a meeting between Zelensky and Putin at all. By the way, sometimes Russians write that there shouldn't be a meeting because what if Zelensky kills Putin? I think if that happened, a lot would be forgiven to Zelensky for what he's criticized for in Ukraine, including the reasons for the protests that were mentioned in this segment. And in today's situation, that's not on the table. It seems to me that we're saying this, first of all, for Donald Trump. Donald, look, we're for peace. You want to stop the shooting, and we just want to stop the shooting. Plus, this point is for the international community to once again emphasize who the villain and scoundrel is here. Obviously, that's Vladimir Putin and the Russian population. That also needs to be emphasized. As for those who flew away on the N-24 in the Amur region, of course, we no longer count them. But actually, I wouldn't call this meeting fruitless. I'm not talking about the humanitarian aspects. So I completely agree with you that the issue of prisoner exchanges is a key, important, and significant thing. But it doesn't pertain to what are called substantive negotiations. So the Russians have actually started to model a structure that will be responsible for the ceasefire. So when this will happen, I don't know, maybe not soon, maybe in 10 years. But when Medinsky was authorized by Putin said, let's create working groups, I immediately remembered the Minsk agreements. Back then, there were working groups as well. Now, they're proposing 3 working groups that will communicate via Skype. And now here's the question. So, well, the humanitarian exchange group has already been created in practice. There's nothing to discuss here. And this worked, by the way, even before the negotiations, exchanges were already taking place. Let's remember, we even carried out such exchanges with Wagner fighters. The second group deals with political issues, and the third with military ones. And now pay attention. What exactly are military supposed to discuss over Skype between Kyiv and Moscow when the Russians are saying that they will keep fighting? By the way, during the closed session, Medinsky no longer told the Ukrainian delegation that we could keep fighting forever. And he didn't mention the rubrics either. He did dip a little into history at the press conference, but that was more of a show for foreign journalists. So these options, this political group and the military one, I see this as their first attempt to test the waters. The Ukrainian side accordingly took some time to think it over. And let me remind you that there was a similar group within the framework of the Minsk agreements. Not a group, sorry, a subgroup. It dealt with economic issues. But since there obviously won't be any economic relations between Ukraine and Russia for generations to come, they don't intend to create one either. So to say that this is a pointless exercise is probably not accurate. The question here is, what is it really about? Decisions aren't actually made in Istanbul, just as before they're made in Moscow, whether to continue the war or to stop it, or in Washington, for that matter, whether to supply Ukraine with tomahawks or not, and in Kyiv, accordingly, whether to kill Russians or not. So that's clear. And there, everyone basically arrived with their own, let's say, instructions. The Russians, for example, had worked through all their instructions. How did it take 40 minutes? Well, to see Medinsky, of course, you probably had to go there. If we were to bring back 1,200 of our citizens, then of course it was worth going.
Ahem. Let's talk about what I think is a super important topic, the situation between Azerbaijan and Russia. Following up on what Aliyev said, that Ukraine must by no means recognize the occupation of its territories. They're still catching Wagner fighters there. I think you've seen those news reports too about crimes committed specifically on Ukrainian territory. And there's another interesting, excuse the slang, movement going on, because this hunt for migrants, what is it turning into? They're even persecuting members of the so-called Russian community in the Chelyabinsk region, which in fact seems to be working for the Kremlin. And that's quite a paradox. Let me briefly inform our audience. In the Chelyabinsk region, the leadership of one of the local communities is persecuting Russian people based on their ethnicity. Well, maybe they want to impress with the successes of Ukrainian nationalists. That's a quote from a Russian Telegram channel. Not only was the community declared an undesirable organization, but they're also trying to put pressure on its members. Let's talk about what's actually happening between Russia and Azerbaijan. How do you see this conflict developing? Will Azerbaijan back down, or will Russia have to accept that it's losing influence in this region?
Well, I think we need to define our terms. A conflict is when bullets are flying, bombs are dropping, and so on. In other words, that's war. But on a larger scale, this needs to be discussed. What's wrong with Russian Nazis? The problem with Russian Nazis is that they want, A, to shoot down passenger planes. In this case, Azerbaijan was unlucky, and after that, they don't want to apologize or pay compensation for it. In general, this is a rule both of international relations and of good neighborliness, which they love to talk about so much. Well, fine, they shot down an Azerbaijani passenger plane. If they had paid compensation there, and as Putin wrote, Putin apologized, but they didn't specify what for. Then, accordingly, this story began with the persecution of Azerbaijanis on ethnic ground. What did Aliyev do? He basically just said that Azerbaijanis shouldn't be killed. Well, as the president of Azerbaijan, he probably has the right to say that. And then, of course, the Russian whining about this started. How dare you? We love killing everyone. We're not the first to shoot down a civilian plane, and nothing ever happened to us for it. I remember the MiG-17, and indeed, nothing has happened to them for it so far. The Azerbaijanis, first of all, only verbally disagreed with this point of view. And accordingly, all these phrases started being thrown at them. We just have to raise an eyebrow and Azerbaijan will understand everything. They started making threats and so on. It just looks ridiculous. It looks disgusting. I don't see a single, how should I put it, argument for Ilham Aliyev to say something like, we were wrong. We shouldn't have shot it down. We shouldn't have gotten so worked up about them shooting down our passenger plane. If you want, Russian brothers, shoot down another one. Let's send you another so you can practice. Is that how it's supposed to be or something? I rule out that possibility. All the more so many people think that Azerbaijan, in a way, that its allies have more guts. Well, we understand that we are talking about Turkey, a NATO country, and the Turks, if it comes to it, are ready to fight. European countries are not ready. This is by no means, it's not criticism. We also thought we weren't ready. But then it turned out that when you're backed into a corner, you simply have no choice. And that's it. So they'll just drool over Azerbaijan. And Putin doesn't comment on this topic at all. By the way, he doesn't comment on any questions related to the most important topics at all. That's not a coincidence. This sign, the silent Putin, he no longer tells, say, the Azerbaijani military, take power into your own hands. For some reason, as he once said to our generals and not just to the generals. So all we can do is know that if a Turkish base appears in Azerbaijan by some indications, you could say this has already happened, at least in terms of military interoperability. Well, there you have it, NATO bases in the South Caucasus. Everything turned out just as Vladimir Putin wanted when he started the full-scale war against Ukraine, except it was a negative outcome.
Rom, I can't help but discuss with you the reaction of Ukraine's adversaries. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's an American who really hates Ukraine, a Congresswoman Marjorie, my apologies. She wrote about the protests in Kyiv, which everyone probably knows the reasons for. It's primarily poor communication between the authorities and the people, and an attempt to hastily make a very important decision for Ukrainians, which once again proves that there was no dictatorship in Ukraine, and there never will be, because people out on the streets, that's the most important signal. But nevertheless, all of this relates to the fight against corruption. So what does this Congresswoman write? I'll quote for our audience who may not be aware. Mass protests have erupted in Kyiv against Ukrainian President Zelensky, as he is a dictator and refuses to sign a peace agreement and end the war. Well done, Ukrainians. Remove him from office. What do you think? Can we ruin everything for ourselves by what's happening right now on the streets of Kyiv? I mean, by handing over the tools to those who want Ukraine to lose. Yes, by giving them all the tools.
Well, I do agree with her on one thing. She has a completely different goal and logic. Her statement ends with the phrasal words and with "stop supplying weapons to Ukraine." And in this, actually rather silly tweet of hers, everything is fine except that nothing is said about the Russian military invasion. And in the context of saying that the president of Ukraine is a dictator or something else, once again, let's just remind everyone that during martial law, elections are not held, and the protests were against Zelensky. Well, Alexander, I for one won't be so cautious. This situation was created by the president's office, and because our country has a strict vertical power structure, especially under martial law, this scandalous law, which, as perceived by society, strips anti-corruption agencies of their independence, was signed by the president of Ukraine. Now he is preparing a new one. And I even had this thought, what if now that everything has already been signed, they just deal with those Nabu cases that were there. And then even if they pass a new law under Western pressure, those cases would have already been flushed down the drain. And attention, people took to the streets against this law. Who provoked the people? Margaret? Or was it actually the president's office? We know perfectly well that we depend on Western subsidies and Western weapons. Any delay in this matter means more deaths of Ukrainian citizens. We all know this. And we know how complicated the situation is in the States. This wavering Donald Trump, who always wants well, in general, not all Ukrainians like him, because he hasn't sent us the Death Star. And of course, I fully understand that if a decision is made for American political reasons not to supply weapons to Ukraine, they will find an excuse. But the question simply arises, why does the Ukrainian government give people like Mama Marjorie Taylor Greene the necessary tools? That's all there is to it. And the fact that she spreads fake news about Zelensky not wanting to make peace, well, that's just nonsense. We've already discussed all of this today. So as I understand it, every parliament in a democratic country has its own, in a way, oddballs who sometimes tell the truth, sometimes lie, and sometimes mix it all together. But the fact remains, we cannot risk Western aid. Take our previous phone conversations with European leaders. When things started to get shaky in the States with Trump, our European allies became as vital as air to us. In other words, weapons and money are like air. They're our means of survival. Before, we used to discuss the war, a ceasefire, and other things. What systems will they supply us with? And now, attention, what have the Germans and the French officially announced? It seems that if Merkel and accordingly Macron want to talk to Zelensky about corruption, more precisely about anti-corruption legislation. Attention! So who here, how should I put it, provoked whom? Well, we're not going to accuse our partners in Europe or outside of Europe of being the hand of Moscow. Well, this isn't the hand of Moscow. That's why this issue should ideally be resolved as quickly as possible for everyone's mutual benefit. It's simply in everyone's interest, the current ruling team, because they want to run in the elections. And if they go into the elections with this kind of case, then it's all going to be very bad. But first, they have to make it to the elections at all. I'm just reminding you, that's all. This concerns everyone because there are more than enough musings in Russia about how it wouldn't be so bad to kill Zelensky. And not just Zelensky. So, well, maybe I'm not being very diplomatic, but I have a feeling that everyone will agree with me, at least when it comes to cause and effect relationships. There's no need to step on the same rake.
Absolutely. Well, it seems they've already submitted a second document. We'll probably discuss it next time. I hope this will become a compromise. Thank you so much. Roman Cymbaluk, journalist and blogger, was on air with Ukraine Today. Roma, all the best to you. See you next time.
See you soon.